Okay, so this video is just going to recap some of those key language techniques that we need to know for the reading exams for functional skills English. So, what are language techniques? Language techniques are where we are looking at what the writer is doing within a sentence. So, the writer is trying to achieve some kind of purpose. They might be trying to persuade you, to inform you, to share their views, for example, and they are going to find ways to do that using the words in their sentences. And they are going to use certain strategies or techniques within those sentences to achieve their purpose. And these language techniques, these strategies, there are certain sort of versions of these that are well known and used time and time again, and they come up in the exams that we are going to face. Each of these sorts of techniques or strategies, if you like, they have their own specific name, and we need to be able to remember those names and to recognize where these techniques are being used within a text. When it comes to our writing, we also need to be able to use some of these ourselves to achieve our purpose. Now, the key ones, the main ones that you will have covered in class, are what we sometimes refer to as fear techniques. So these are things like facts and statistics, emotive language, alliteration, addressing the audience, or sometimes known as direct address, rule of three, repetition, and rhetorical questions. Now, these are ones that you have gone over a fair bit in class, so I'm not going to focus on these ones first in this video. I'm going to talk about some of the other well-known techniques that quite often come up in the exams, but maybe you're not as familiar with, just to give you a reminder about them. I will come back to the fear techniques towards the end of the video if you still need a recap. So, other features that we need to look out for. I know it sounds quite broad, but quite often we see positive and negative language being used, and writers are so using that for a reason. They are trying to get you to think or feel positively or negatively about the same topic as them. Similes and metaphors, so these are both ways of comparing things to help describe them. Commands or imperative verbs to tell you what to do. And quite often we'll see use of the first person. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about these. But it is good to know these. These come up quite often in the text that we see in the level 1 and 2 exams. So use of the first person. What we mean by this is when the writer is talking about themselves. So we quite often see them using the word I or I'm, which is obviously short for I am. When a text is being instructive, when it's advising you, they quite often tell you what to do or how to do something, and they will use a certain type of verb, a very bossy kind of verb that tells you what to do, and we call this the imperative verb. But in a non-technical way, we can call that a command, and if you use either of those sort of phrases, imperative verb or command, in an exam, you can still pick up the marks. So, for example, things like sit down, file the reports, turn on the computer, where those actions are being sort of made into commands, they're telling you what to do, it's a good clue that this is what you're looking at. So, positive and negative language. So, positive, the use of happy or cheerful kind of words, such as the beautiful flower. And negative language, the use of upsetting or angry kind of words, such as the disgusting gross bin. Again, these are usually very descriptive kind of words, so things like adjectives that we might see. Similes and metaphors, so these are both comparisons to help describe what something is like. Similes, think the word simile, similar. So it uses words like or as to show that one thing over here is similar to another thing over here. For instance, some of you may know this gent, he was as big as a mountain. So we're saying that this person over here is like or similar to a mountain in his size, to emphasize just how big he is. Metaphors are slightly different. This is where we say that one thing is another thing. We're not comparing it to say that it is like, we're saying that it actually is that thing. So for instance, again, to describe the same person, with a slight adjustment of my wording, he was a mountain. Okay? So we're at the stage now where I'm going to recap the fear techniques. So if you don't want a recap on those, please stop the video now. So facts and statistics. Facts are something that we know to be true. We can prove them to be true. There might be records or evidence that we can use to prove it. Statistics are a form of fact. They are a type of fact that uses numbers. So things like percentages, probabilities, amounts, dates, they are all forms of statistic. So, for example, 1 in 5 young drivers will have an accident in their first year of driving. Emotive language. So, the word emotive, it comes from the root word emotions. So, think about feelings. It might be directly that we see words that are linked to feelings. It might also be indirectly that a writer talks about a topic that perhaps is upsetting or makes you angry in order to get the reader to feel a certain way. So there's sort of two routes there. Either of those we call emotive language, such as this one. Feeling stressed out? Why not take a calming activity like yoga? Alliteration. So this is where we have a repeated sound or letter at the start of several words together. In functional skills texts, we might see 2 or even 3 words together within a sentence that perhaps start with the same letter. But my example for you here is quite exaggerated. Hairy Harry hated having his hair cut. It's quite catchy, it makes it more memorable, and it sticks in our minds. So this is why a writer will use this technique. Addressing the audience, also sometimes referred to as direct address. It is literally that the writer is talking directly to their audience. So even though their audience might be hundreds or thousands of people, they use words like you and your to kind of create almost like a one-to-one personal kind of conversation to make them feel included, to make them feel part of the group, and to sort of get their points across to you personally or directly. Very persuasive, that one. So, for example, if you want to know more, you can go to the website. Rule of 3. So this is where we have 3 words or phrases together within the same sentence. It looks a little bit like a list. If you have more than 3 things, it isn't rule of 3, but we can refer to that as a list if you notice something similar. And again, 3 is a kind of a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Interesting technique to use here. The rule of 3 is kind of psychological. For some reason, our brains, they love the number 3 and they love patterns of 3s. So when a sentence is built up in 3 parts, our brains take note of it. It's quite catchy and memorable again. So this is quite important and is used a lot in speeches because it helps to create a memorable kind of sentence or phrase, and it emphasizes points to the audience. So it is a very persuasive technique. So, for example, you need to finish the reports, input the data, and file the invoices. Repetition. So this is usually seen throughout a text where the same sort of word, phrase, or idea is repeated in several parts to really emphasize and bring the reader's attention back to that point or idea. Sometimes you might find the same word repeated within the same sentence, and that is what we are more likely to see in the text that we face in an exam. So, for example, it was really, really cold. Last but not least, then, rhetorical questions. Question that does not require an answer. A writer will deliberately use this to get their reader thinking about things from a certain point of view. They're not expecting them to really answer that question. And a very good clue for you when you are looking through a text, if you spot a question mark, the likelihood is that the writer is asking a rhetorical question. So always be on the lookout for them. For example, who wouldn't want to win $1 million? So now that we've recapped on all those sort of common techniques, it's now over to you. You need to learn them, you need to revise them, you need to practice looking for them and recognizing them in text so that you're ready for your exam.